discuss the types of mentoring. And Doug has jumped on board and said, hey, look, I'll take care of this one. And what we're going to do is turn it over to Doug, and he's going to share some ideas with us around the types of mentoring.
I'm going to, my approach to this was to look at this from the aspect of some of the areas that I do a lot of the mentoring that I do, a lot of the areas and the sort of the techniques or the processes that we use. And so there's a number of different types, I guess is the best words, types of mentoring. So there's one-on-one and face-to-face. So let's maybe talk about that. So you can have a one-on-one mentoring relationship, mentoring arrangement, and that can be both in person and can be done virtually as well. And so keep that in mind as you take a look at that part. The one that's the most popular and the one that I certainly like the best is a face-to-face, in-person meetup or meeting with a prospective mentee. And I find the reason for that is with face-to-face interaction, you get a chance to observe the body language and you get to feel the energy levels. And there's some other things that face-to-face gives you, as well as you get to hear the person's voice and the different, challenges and stuff. In a face-to-face relationship, I feed off a lot of what my intuition tells me that I'm getting from the conversation that I'm having with the person. And so that's kind of the whole face-to-face thing. Virtual is where you're using technology to have a mentoring discussion with an individual. So today I'm mentoring a few people in a virtual relationship. I'm mentoring a couple of young men in Kingston, Jamaica. And we use Google Hangout as an example for a technology solution to be able to do that. For somebody to be comfortable in working with a virtual relationship, you need to be very astute at body language and effective communication. And by effective communication, I mean the ability to be able to understand and hear what the other person is saying. And so it's really important that you're plugged in, you're present, even though it's a virtual relationship, but you need to be plugged in and present while the conversation is going on. Because I'm able to be able to sense or feel virtually what is going on the other end of the conversation. And as a result of that, I can tailor how or where I'm going to guide, say, my two guys in Jamaica, where I'm going to guide them to next, and what are some of the different topics that we may need to discuss in order to help them better position, in order to help them, continue on their path to success. So those are out of the gate, those are the first three types of mentoring that seem to be the most predominant. The next one I want to talk about, and then I'm going to come to you, Stephen, and get your thoughts so far as we go along. But the next one is group mentoring. And let me set the stage for this. So group mentoring can be done in a couple different ways. The one way is, and we talk about this coming up later on today, is the aspect of the mentoring circle. And so I'll save some of that for a little bit later. The other part that I have used group mentoring for is when I'm dealing with a situation in an organization, and typically it's due to a breakdown in communication. But what happens is you have different work groups within an organization that all of a sudden are falling apart. They don't communicate with each other, and all of those things that ultimately then impact customer service. The clients, the customers are starting to say, what's going on with this organization? I think I'm going to take my business elsewhere because, they don't even get along amongst themselves. And then when they come to, to my job site or wherever, they're bringing all that baggage with them, and it's not a pleasant experience. So the process that we typically use for that is it's mentoring one-on-one, so working with individuals within each of the different groups. It's then mentoring within the group to get them to be able to communicate within their work group, and then it's work group to work group. And so then what you do is some of the times I will have them bring problems to the table, and then what we'll do is we'll talk about it, and then we'll come up with potential solutions, but it's everybody contributing to what we're going to do to move forward and be able to put into practice. So that's kind of the group mentoring piece. And like I said, we'll talk about the mentoring circle a little bit later on. Thoughts so far?
Yeah, I agree with you. The key with the group mentoring when you're looking at an issue of some kind, though, is the line of confidentiality. That's an important element, because you want the people to be asking the mentor questions, but they're also asking each other questions, because what we're doing is we're getting them to think about becoming mentors to each other, peer mentoring. It's what really helps to unfold, but there's always lines there of confidentiality. There might even be lines about how far we might go if it all of a sudden starts to feel a little bit like counseling. So there's that kind of element. But that facilitator circle that you're sharing, which is really great to get mentors together to talk about mentoring, that is an exciting time. And I know we're going to chat a little bit more about that later. But I just wanted to chat or share the notion of the line. Where are lines that you don't want to cross?
Well, and what's also interesting, and just to kind of add to the whole idea of the mentoring circle piece, is that, and I just did one last weekend, and what came out of it when we were talking, we had somebody new join the group, and everybody was kind of talking about, this is what I get from it value-wise and all of that sort of stuff. And well, one of the attendees who has sort of been with us right from the beginning said that for me, it's not so much about being involved in mentoring or being a mentee or whatever. They are a mentee, they just don't know it. But the biggest thing that come out of all of this was the aspect of, based on the conversation that takes place, the facilitated conversation that takes place, they take stuff away that helps them back in their workplace in being able to communicate with people that are a challenge for them. So they end up acquiring tools that they can use on an individual basis. And so that's another bonus or a plus that we sometimes don't talk about when we're talking about group mentoring or, the mentoring circle. Like, why would I want to join a mentoring circle? Well, there's a good reason why right there. So my next one I want to talk about, and I'm only going to talk about this one briefly because it's not a good word to use, is the old adage of reverse mentoring. And reverse mentoring, sort of where that comes from, is a younger person acting as the mentor for a much older person. Typically, it's done to help somebody work their way through technology challenges that they may be having. And so the younger person, who is obviously more astute at being able to navigate through all the different technology hurdles and that's where the younger person will work with the older person to help them. It has been labeled as reverse mentoring. I'm going to say to our listeners out there today, pick up a dictionary and look at the definition of reverse, and reverse means going backwards. And I'm sorry, but any mentoring relationship or arrangement that I have, nobody's going backwards. We're going forwards. And so reverse mentoring to me is effective mentoring because it's a two-way trusted relationship. And so then from there we get into peer-to-peer, and we've kind of touched on that. The next two that I want to talk about is informal and formal mentoring. And when you put it into practice or you implement a workplace mentoring program, it is a combination of formal and informal mentoring. So with formal mentoring, it's somebody is assigned to mentor another person. With informal mentoring, there's no formal assignment. it becomes, as I like to refer to it, a way of life in the organization. And people they know that when they wake up in the morning and come to work, they're going to learn something from somebody else, and conversely share some of their wisdom and knowledge. And it's not a structured thing. It's not a formal workplace mentoring program. It just happens, and people learn and grow, and they share all of that quite willingly and freely. And so I have just a couple more that I want to touch on. One is training based, and where the idea around this comes from. You send somebody off for some training. When they come back to the organization, the mentoring, that they may be assigned a mentor, but it's very, very focused on the training and sort of leveraging what they learned while they were taking the training program. So it's almost like a leadership development program, which is also, something that I'm very passionate about, where mentoring needs to be plugged into that. Training based is somewhat the same, but it's very specific. The mentoring is very specific to what the training that this person was away taking and has come back. And so now we want to reinforce the learning that they have gone through is the best way to approach that. Excuse me. We've talked about traditional mentoring to some extent, but traditional mentoring is the gray-haired sage on top of the mountain, passing on their wisdom and knowledge. And so that's the traditional. Traditional is not as predominant today as what it was years ago. And that's because of, the mentoring paradigm that's taken place. And it's now not being replaced, but being enhanced by effective or modern mentoring. This, obviously, we could go on for quite a bit longer when it comes to, the different types of mentoring and where each could be used. But my intent behind this was to give everybody just a real kind of a snapshot of what each looked like.
Well, for sure, and thanks for that. There's a couple that I would add, because I find them interesting, because there's a lot of people offering books and calling it a mentor program. It's true. Authors, they are mentors. They just don't happen to be present, and you're reading about what's going on. If someone was to add the online course from the author themselves, then there's a little bit more connection that's going on. But unfortunately, we don't necessarily get an opportunity for the mentee to ask the mentor questions in that sort of capacity. Having said that, I also know of a really great technique, is when I go to read a book, one of the things I do is I ask the book 3 questions. He asked the book 3, what? No, what I do is I just write down, what are 3 things I want to know from the book? Because if I read the title, the front jacket, the back jacket, and just get a sense of what the book's about, look at the table of contents, I can ask the book 3 questions. So in a way, right, reading autobiographies and books and using this little technique, and I'm the mentee, I am asking the mentor some questions. So it's just kind of a fun way to look at it. And another one that I want to bring to our attention is this notion of speed mentoring. And again, it weaves into something I'm going to chat about a little bit later, because I'm seeing it happening in a certain industry, and I just like to bring that to everyone's attention. So those are just a couple that I would add at this point. So anything else about types of mentoring, Doug?
No, that's